Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Every trade made in the National Football League has at least some element of risk attached to it. Some trades are riskier than others, but for the most part, you're not seeing trades where one side gets a surefire thing and is risking absolutely nothing. That's just not the way it works. And when you make trades, you win some and you lose some. The Cincinnati Bengals have made some pretty solid trades in their franchise's history spanning over half a century. From the James Brooks trade with the San Diego Chargers to the Carson Palmer trade with the Oakland Raiders that landed some pretty solid players, the Bengals have had their fair share of trades where they took a chance and came out on top. However, there was one trade that was unbelievably risky that we have to talk about that you might not know about. You have to admire the guts it took to make a trade like this. The Bengals traded away multiple players, including a pretty solid starter, for a rookie who had not been signed yet, for a rookie who might still reject the offer and never play for you, and for a rookie that, even if he does sign, was likely to take a redshirt year and not play right away. And the end result of this trade? Well, let's just say when you take gambles, you win some and you lose some. And the Bengals definitely lost this one. This is the story of the Reggie Rembert trade, which might be the riskiest trade in Bengals history. Before I talk about the trade in question, as well as why the Bengals and Jets made this trade, we need some context to understand just who Reggie Rembert is, and why he was such a coveted prospect in the first place. Our story begins in 1988, when after starting out at Independence Community College in Kansas, Rembert continued his collegiate football career for West Virginia. Yes, it's the same Independence that would later be featured 3 decades later in Netflix's Last Chance U. When Rembert joined West Virginia in 1988, I don't think anyone expected that the Mountaineers would have the season that they did. The 1988 season was one to remember, as West Virginia shocked just about everyone by going undefeated in the regular season and making it all the way to the Fiesta Bowl, where they had a shot at winning the national championship. While West Virginia would lose to Notre Dame and fall short, many people argue that 1988 was the best season in program history, and it's not hard to see why. And the play of Reggie Rembert was a big reason why. During that 1988 campaign, Rembert had 23 receptions for 516 yards and 7 touchdowns, as well as an additional 3 rushing touchdowns. He was an unbelievable deep threat, as his average of 22.4 yards per catch that season ranked second across all independents and 4th in the entire NCAA. Rembert also finished that season with the second most touchdowns on the team, so he was an instrumental part of the success of West Virginia that season. And while the Mountaineers wouldn't quite replicate the success that they had in the 1988 season during 1989, although they did make it to a bowl game finish inside the top 25, Rembert had a season to remember. In 1989, Rembert led the team with 47 receptions for 850 yards and 11 touchdowns. He was West Virginia's passing offense. Of the 18 touchdown passes that the Mountaineers threw in 1989, 61% of them went to Rembert. Defenses knew what was coming when Major Harris bought himself enough time to look deep down the field, and they just couldn't stop it. Rembert set a few school records that season, as he finished the season 6th in the NCAA and 2nd across all independents in receiving touchdowns. When it was time for the NFL draft, Rembert was one of the names to watch, and was projected to be one of the first receivers to go off the board. And that's when the New York Jets came calling. After an awful 1989 season, where they had the 3rd worst offense in football and a completely lethargic passing attack that combined to throw 14 touchdowns and 24 interceptions, it was clear that in 1990, the New York Jets had to do whatever they could in order to improve their passing attack. With their 2nd round pick, needing some help at the receiver position, especially since only one player on the team had more than 2 receiving touchdowns the year before, the Jets decided to take Reggie Rembert, making him the 2nd receiver to fly off the board, only behind Alexander Wright of the Dallas Cowboys earlier in the round. So that should be the end of it, right? Rembert is now a Jet, and is going to the Big Apple to try and make the Jets respectable on offense again. Well, not quite. Things started off on a really bad foot when he landed at LaGuardia Airport. After showing up late, which was completely allowed because he was finishing up classes, when Rembert finally landed at LaGuardia, there was no one on the team there to pick him up. It took 3 hours for Rembert to get from the airport to the team facility after finally being able to get a taxi and then having to sit in New York's iconic traffic. And that wasn't the only way that the Jets disrespected him. The Jets were playing hardball with Rembert. Part of it was that the Jets would later spend a 1st round pick in the supplemental draft on Syracuse wide receiver Rob Moore. And I've talked about him in a previous video of mine, so if you want to learn more about him and how his time with the Jets was, then click the card in the upper right corner. And part of it was that Rembert suffered a leg injury one day into camp. However, it was very clear that Rembert and the Jets were far apart on a deal. Consider this. With the 31st pick in the draft, the Phoenix Cardinals drafted Indiana running back Anthony Thompson. He got a deal worth $425,000 a year. The Jets were offering Rembert over $27,000 less than that, despite the fact that New York had a higher cost of living, and despite the fact that Rembert was drafted before Thompson. When a player drafted after you is making more than your team is offering, that is flat out insulting, and it becomes even more insulting when Rembert's camp made an offer and the Jets didn't even send a counter. Tensions were running high, with agent Gus Cincinnati saying that the chances that Rembert would sign with the Jets were not good. He said, "Being honest, I don't see the deal getting done. The ball is in their court. The last offer was given by us, and we would expect a counteroffer. When he sees players 3 picks after him getting deals for more money than he has offered, he doesn't feel wanted. And he says, if they don't want me, they should trade me." Sure enough, that's exactly what they did. Enter the Cincinnati Bengals. We have to ask ourselves this question. Why were the Bengals at all interested in Reggie Rembert? The Cincinnati Bengals had one of the best starting units at the wide receiver position with Tim McGee and Eddie Brown. McGee was coming off of a fantastic 1989 season where he had 65 receptions for 1,211 yards and 8 touchdowns, finishing 9th in the league in receiving yards. And Eddie Brown was a really solid player who was 1 year removed from a Pro Bowl campaign with the Bengals when they made it all the way to Super Bowl XXIII. Brown was the Offensive Rookie of the Year in 1985, and through the first 5 years of his career, had 260 receptions for over 4,600 yards and 30 touchdowns. It was tough to do much better than McGee and Brown as your 2 wideouts. However, behind those 2 guys, the Bengals were incredibly thin. They needed help badly. If one of those 2 guys went down, it was going to be tough. Excluding running backs and tight ends, the 3rd leading receiver on the team in 1989 was Ira Hillary, who had 162 yards and wasn't even on the team anymore, as he was on the Minnesota Vikings in 1990. The next leading receiver was Mike Martin, who had 160 yards and wasn't even on the team anymore, as he would never play another NFL game after that 1989 campaign. Their next leading receiver was Kendall Smith, and while he was on the team in 1990, thereby making him the next best qualified player, his numbers in 1989 were 10 receptions for 140 yards. And the Bengals didn't spend a pick on a wide receiver until the 5th round, when they took Arizona State wideout Lynn James. When I said the Bengals had no help at the wide receiver position outside of the top 2 guys, I truly mean it. Head coach Sam Weish was very blunt in his assessment of the wide receiver position, echoing what the stat sheet noted. He said, "Most people think of us as being a wide open passing club, but our starting 2 receivers are the only 2 players that have recent veteran production. Wide receiver may be our thinnest position on the team. If the Bengals were going to improve their offense and make it even stronger than it already was, as they ended the 1989 season with the 4th most points in the league and the 2nd most passing touchdowns, then they were going to have to upgrade the wide receiver position." And with the Rembert negotiations in New York falling through, the Bengals swooped in and made an offer that the Jets could not refuse. Near the end of training camp, the 2 sides struck a deal. The Jets got offensive tackle Scott Jones and linebacker Joe Kelly, and in return, the Bengals got Reggie Rembert. However, I have to emphasize just how insanely risky this entire deal was. First off, let's look at who the Bengals gave up. Scott Jones was a backup, so this wasn't a big deal. But losing Joe Kelly was. Kelly started all 16 games for the Bengals in 1989, and had been the team's starting middle right linebacker for the past 3 seasons. He even started for the Bengals at Super Bowl XXIII, and was only 26 years old. The Bengals were giving him up at the end of training camp, and were going to have to shuffle their whole starting lineup around just for Reggie Rembert. And it would be one thing if Rembert was ready to go. But here's the thing. The trade with the Jets was just to have the rights to negotiate with Rembert. There was a very real chance that the Bengals wouldn't be able to get a deal done, and Rembert would just re-enter the draft in 1991, with the team giving away their young starting linebacker for nothing. And remember, the man who was in charge of getting this deal done was Mike Brown. Let's just say Brown was not the easiest man to negotiate a deal with, as evidenced by the entire debacle with linebacker Ricky Hundley a few years before. I talked about that in a previous video of mine, so if you want to learn more about that, then click the card in the upper right corner. And even if there was no issue with getting Rembert to sign, there was still the fact that Rembert was probably not even going to play in 1990. He had the injury that kept him out of a lot of practice. He was going to have to get into game shape, and he was going to have to learn the playbook. Weish said that there was a very real possibility that Rembert was going to redshirt 1990, and wouldn't even be able to suit up with the Bengals right away. Even Mike Brown was skeptical of the trade, saying there's no question the Jets got the safe side of this deal. Rembert's a big question mark. It could be something for nothing, or something for something. The message was clear. This was a massive gamble. When you put all those factors together, it's clear that this was the riskiest trade that the Bengals had ever made. So did this gamble work out in the end? Well, not quite. The good news for the Bengals was that they were able to sign Rembert. The deal got done almost immediately after the trade happened. As in what seems like a bizarre world moment considering it's Mike Brown we're talking about here, Rembert got what he was looking for straight away. But that was the only thing that went right for Rembert with the Bengals. He did not play in 1990, and when he finally got a suit up for the team in 1991, he was incredibly underwhelming. Brown said after making the trade that he thought Rembert could be a top-of-the-line number 1 receiver, but that clearly did not happen. Rembert played with the Bengals from 1991 to 93 and recorded just 36 receptions for 437 yards and a touchdown. He is a member of the 1 touchdown club. In other words, Rembert did next to nothing in the NFL. and maybe he would have been able to stick around for a little longer if he didn't continuously shoot himself in the foot with off-the-field incidents. He was convicted of drunken driving in 1991 and was convicted a second time in 1992. It was so bad that Rembert had to miss 6 games of the NFL season and was ordered to go to rehab in Atlanta. In the middle of the 1993 season, for the 3rd time in 3 years, Rembert was arrested for driving under the influence after getting into an accident. By this point, the Bengals were done with Rembert. He wasn't going to change. Nothing was working, and the production did not match the headache that it was worth. Mike Brown said, "We have given Reggie chance after chance. We tried to work with him, but eventually, our patience wore out." And just like that, Rembert's NFL career was done. The Bengals tried taking a gamble with the Rembert trade, even though they knew he probably wasn't going to play right away, even though they were giving up a very good young linebacker who would go on to play another 7 seasons in the NFL, and even though they were not guaranteed the possibility of him signing in the first place. They tried to improve their depth at the wide receiver position, and it just did not work out. Some gambles work out better than others. And while this one did not work out, you can't deny the fact that it was quite the high-stakes gamble to take. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters who help get the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.